Drug developers, investors, researchers, and corporate executives wrestle weekly to understand what is happening in commercial development of NASH medications. Join hepatology researcher and key opinion leader Stephen Harrison, patient advocate Donna, liver wellness advocate Louise Campbell, and forecasting and pricing guru Roger Green as they discuss the issues affecting the evolving NASH market from their own unique perspectives on the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast.
This is Roger Green, executive producer and host of Surfing the NASH Tsunami, and welcome to episode 41. The episode you're about to hear was originally designed to talk about what's happened in Washington, good and bad, for the liver in the last 4 years, and what's likely to happen going forward. We got so involved in the topics of the last 4 years that we decided to split this podcast into two. So episode 41 is about what's happened for the liver in the last 4 years, and next week's episode 42 will be about what does the 2020 election mean and going forward. I think it's a great podcast. We had a lot of fun and a lot of interest doing it. I hope you enjoy it. And now it starts. For everyone with an interest in NASH, or more broadly, fatty liver disease, surf's up. Episode 41 of Surfing the NASH Tsunami starts now. This is our first episode of December 2020, which means that this heaven-forsaken year may actually come to an end at some point soon. It seems appropriate, talking to friends, that most of the people I know are forswearing New Year's Eve parties for anybody outside their close circle. Now, they're doing that obviously for reasons of safety, but this is a year, I'm not sure everybody is looking to celebrate, although the end of which I think is making lots of people quite joyous. So around here, though, not all bad. I mean, we started this podcast this year in April. By the notes I've got, this is the 41st episode. We've got 36 or 37 hours of tape that we've created on a bunch of topics with upwards of 17 or 18 folks coming on over the course of the year. And I feel that this year I feel fortunate. I've gotten to know this community a little bit. I've gotten to know the people. I've gotten to learn about your passion and your mission. And thanks for letting this podcast, the people who are part of it, including me, become part of your lives this year. Also, personally, the fact that I live in Pennsylvania, not Georgia, means that one good thing about December is I don't have to see any more television commercials for politicians. Because, trust me, until Election Day, we had more of them than we knew what to do with. The reference to political commercials is a bridge to what we're going to be talking about this week. I think as we've all learned in the last 4 years, elections have consequences. And not just the obvious one, but others that you would never imagine. And if part of what this podcast started out to do was to talk about strategy and forecasting, part of strategy and forecasting is understanding the environment. And I think all of us would be well advised to take a look and to ask more broadly, so how did the liver do in 2020 and how did the liver do in the 2020 U.S. elections? So to help, we have back our dear friend and sometime colleague, Donna. Donna, we are thrilled to have you back with us. Welcome.
Thank you.
And she has brought with her colleague, Director of Policy at Global Liver Institute, Andrew Scott. Andrew, welcome to Surfing the NASH Tsunami.
Thank you. Excited to be here.
Yeah, we're excited to have you. And in fact, Andrew is going to provide a lot of the expert wisdom today, sharing his insights on parts of inside the Beltway life that you would never see if you didn't do what he does for a living. So Andrew, do me a favor, take a couple of minutes, walk us a little bit through your background and what you do now. And then at the end, share with us one fact we would never know just from looking at you or listening to you.
Sure. Well, thank you. So I have really spent my career building a foundation in health policy and government affairs. I started studying public health at Johns Hopkins University in Baltimore, and then coming down to Washington, D.C. to work for Endo Pharmaceuticals and their government affairs team. I was there for about 5 years. And at Endo, I kind of learned all the ins and outs of working in a small government affairs shop, learning how to be mobile and look for wins and in a policy world that can be difficult to find those consistent wins, right? And working with lobbyists and more, it was really a great experience to kind of build that initial foundation. And then from there, I went to Kalari Communications Global. And this is a consulting firm that acts as an intermediary between patient advocacy organizations and other stakeholders and pharmaceutical companies and medical device companies, and essentially works with them to build outreach plans, strategic plans, and more to kind of build awareness in patient communities and patient advocacy networks. And I really brought some of my government affairs experience to them. And then after that, I went to Global Liver Institute, which is where I am today, obviously. And I've been the director of policy for Global Liver Institute for almost 2 years. My 2-year anniversary comes up in February, actually, so it's very exciting. But what really excited me about Global Liver Institute is the opportunity to not only take what I've learned, the foundation, the ability to wear many different hats in government affairs, and to apply that and to really kind of build out a policy department to also be a leader in the liver health policy field. As I'm sure Donna has said many times before, in our minds and what we believe should be is liver health policy is global health policy, right? So we really believe that a lot of the issues that we work on deserve their time in the spotlight. I mean, I've been able to really kind of apply that and to kind of not only apply that kind of central theme, but look for those low-hanging fruit, consistent wins, while also developing the long-term strategies that I'm sure we'll talk a little bit about later today, but really kind of work on the two fronts, the short term, which, there's some things in 2020 that we've accomplished. And then again, the other things that are more long-term. So it's been very exciting. And then, just kind of maybe a little something about me, I guess I am bi-coastal. So I'm from California originally, which is where many of my, kind of personal policy maybe comes from, but also I've been able to expand and see how, both sides of the coast operate and learn how really things can be different on both sides of the United States. And then also, it's been exciting to kind of grow here in Washington, D.C. and now hopefully apply what I've been able to learn. So just a little bit about me, and I'm excited about what we'll be talking about later today.
Thanks, Andrew. That's great.
Thank you. We're going to send him down to Texas next to learn how.
I was just going to say, you've seen the rest. Now come learn from the best. Yeah. Come and see us down here in Tejas.
Yeah, and Andrew, if they feel dissed, they will remind you that they were a country before they were a state, and they could always go back if they had to. You never said that, have you, Stephen?
Well, I should mention I played water polo in college. Maybe that was a little fun note I could have mentioned. But some of my teammates were Texans. So I got the big Texas picture from them. And they always have pushed me to come down and visit them. So I do need to do that. That's on the list.
If you ever wonder why there's two different Colorado rivers in this country, then you'll know. There's the Colorado River that actually you're aware of in Arizona that the Grand Canyon was made from, but there's also a separate Colorado River in Texas. We can claim that we have our own Colorado River.
So the only question I have for Andrew then is, how do Texans play water polo different than Californians or anybody else?
Well, it's funny you say that because my buddy from Texas, he was the way I would describe a water polo setup is it's very similar to basketball. And my buddy from Texas was the biggest guy on the team. So you talk about everything bigger in Texas. He was the center of our team. So, I guess that's how he would play it differently than the rest of us. Is he was strong and he would, throw guys around the pool.
That befits the Texan view of the world, doesn't it, Stephen? Who's bigger?
It does. It's very apropos, and I love that analogy.
We have Stephen with us, as you've heard. We also have Louise with us. Good afternoon, Louise.
Afternoon, everybody.
Okay, I guess it's evening where Louise is, and it could be morning when you're listening. So that was a very East Coast-centric thing for me to do. At any rate, so Louise commented last week that she wasn't sure what role a British national would have in this conversation, but I think actually she'll have a valuable role, which is tell us what's going on over there feels different than what's going on over here, and how what we're describing is different than the impressions that she gets from reading newspapers and things over in the UK. So I'm always thrilled to have you, particularly any week that Tottenham's ahead of Liverpool in the football tables. Welcome. And with that, we'll get started. I want to use a 2020 holiday icebreaker special. One thing about this month for you that will be different than previous Decembers have been, and one thing that'll be the same.
I will not be cooking this year. Anything whatsoever will be different. The same will be that gift-giving station and package service rivals Santa's workshop.
So you're saying I should introduce my grandkids to you?
I through my lovely husband Dennis, we have 3, and I have 2 wonderful nieces, and I claim a lot of other people's children, godchildren, anyone who comes within my sort of reach or passes by the house, I become Aunt Donna, and so they are forever mine and on my list. And then there are friends and extended family, and I really do love collecting throughout the year. And when I would travel, throughout my travels, just the perfect gift for people. And my gift closet is extensive, and so we started the process last weekend of assembling and matching it. I used to actually do professional gift wrapping at a department store.
That's a fun fact. That's almost up there with water polo.
Yeah, and it ages a lot better than bagel baking, which was my odd job. No one asks you to bake bagels anymore when you're on in life, but gift wrapping can last forever. That's great.
Yeah, the presents under the tree always look so fantastic if you can gift wrap.
Well, for whichever episode you come back in January, and I'm sure there'll be at least one, you'll have to tell us what your theme and scheme were this year. Excellent. Next.
I'll go. I'll jump in. I was this year will be different to last year because I was in Australia having a very nice hot Christmas, swimming with dolphins and doing all sorts of nice things, where my parents joined me and my husband went because they were on a cruise. So we saw them for one day before they headed around Australia following the bushfires. I'm not too sure they were involved in them, but it was a sad sight to see. They were on Kangaroo Island just before over 50% of the koala population was decimated with the bushfires. So they were probably one of the last people to see that. But no, so this year will be a nice cold Christmas, which I'm used to, and big trees. And I like a cold Christmas but a warm New Year. So it'll be different this year, but back to the normal. Parents coming to me. Social distancing this time. So whilst we're in lockdown and we're allowed to meet for 5 days, I suppose our household are trying to maintain that strict COVID isolation as much as possible for protection until we get the vaccine, which actually starts tomorrow. So it's good here.
Are you first in line?
Oh, I won't be first in line. I'm at number 8 of 9. Just on my age, I get higher than the 9th category.
So you guys actually have a tiered structure for inoculation.
Yeah, I think it's care homes and over 80s first. Then it's with health and frontline workers and and health and social care, which I'm not currently in. And then it comes down to the vulnerable, then via ages. And if you're under the age of 50, I think you're category 9. So we'll see how long it takes to roll out and where they start. But I think the first injections physically start tomorrow.
It'll be interesting to see if those over 80 have different symptoms related to the vaccine than those younger. My understanding is the vaccine is not benign, that you're going to generate some symptoms that could be 2 to 3 days in length and could feel like the flu. So maybe that's over exaggeration or not, but it'll be interesting to see how that's tolerated.
Yeah, and I think that's what they've said, the head of the Public Health England and MHRA, that's exactly what they were saying, that in 30% of individuals, like the flu vaccine, you will get a mild, they describe it, flu-like illness. So we'll see. And the anti-vax will decide what they want to do during that process, and a lot of people are watching it to see whether they'll even take it. So it'll be an interesting concept.
Yes, it shall.
At one of my doctor's offices, and the nurse practitioner was asking me if I was planning to get the vaccine. And my answer was, well, I'd like the FDA to approve it first. And she was like, oh, I think it's an assumption. They've gone ahead and manufactured millions of doses on the assumption, that it will be approved. But until such time, I won't even answer the question.
So let's go back to our question. Stephen, Andrew?
Sure. Well, I can very quickly just say, I think like so many of us, like we've just been talking about, obviously Christmas is going to be very different for my family as well. I mean, I'm still going to see my parents and my sister and my brother-in-law, but, that's it. Previously, it would have been, 30 of us. I'm half Greek, so we have a big Greek contingent. So it's always a strong Christmas and, a lot of yelling and laughing. And, it's going to be a little quieter this year, but we're hopeful that next Christmas, we'll be able to all be together.
Andrew, are you married?
Yes, I am.
Okay. Did you have one of those big fat Greek weddings?
Well, disappointedly, we got married this year during COVID. So it was another very, very small. Yeah. So, we got married in August, so very small, less than 20 people. And we actually did all on boats in the Chesapeake Bay. So a socially distant wedding on different boats. So it's pretty fun. But it was not as big and loud as it could have been.
So I have to ask at least a follow-on question. Did Donna break into her gift closet for the wedding?
Oh, of course. I won't say any more than that, but Donna was there in spirit. Donna and Dennis.
We got something brand new for them.
So very similar to that. We traditionally pack the car the day after Christmas and go back to God's country, which is Mississippi, where I grew up, and that is debatable as to whether or not we will do that. My parents are 78. My mother-in-law is 80, and I have two children, one in college and one a senior in high school, that my daughter is at a cheer competition currently, I'm sure, being exposed to somebody with COVID. So unless we quarantined for 14 days prior to getting in a car and going, I feel like we may be putting my parents and mother-in-law at risk. So it's debatable as to whether we will go. And that would be something different. We've never traditionally been home. And then I usually fly to NASH right after that for an event the first weekend in January, which has also been postponed until March 11th. So what stays the same? I will be cooking. I will do my traditional turkey and ham, just like I do at Thanksgiving, except I'll probably deep fry it, which I did not do at Thanksgiving, but I missed it. So I'll pull out the fryer and do my traditional deep fry turkey. So there you go.
How on earth do you deep fry a turkey?
That is a whole episode of Surfing the Turkey Tsunami.
That is just a Nash turkey.
Yeah, great. If you've never had it, Louise, you're missing a little slice of heaven.
Well, when I come out and make it out there, then you can do turkey. And I'm looking forward to deep fried. I've had one done over a beer can. I've had all sorts of chickens and turkeys, but I've never had a deep fried.
Oh, it's fantastic. So at any rate, what will be different for me is we'll have nobody really with us. The family that lived in Pennsylvania went to Corpus. And as you guys know, and anyone who listens to the podcast knows, for holidays, we have gone to Corpus. In fact, I'm in quarantine right now on day 5 on my way back from Corpus. But we're not going there for Christmas, in our case, Hanukkah. None of the other family lives around. I was telling Stephen in a completely different conversation yesterday that the way Jews celebrate Hanukkah is about one bottle of oil lasting 8 days. So there's a lot of fried food, and somehow it seems to be like deep fried turkey for Hanukkah. Sounds exactly perfect, Stephen.
You should do it.
No, actually, you're going to do it for me. I have no one to make turkey for, but he didn't me. Now, I smoked a turkey for Thanksgiving, which seemed like a very Texan thing to do and something I'd never done in my life, and that was fantastic, too.
Does that count as a Category A or a Category B drug, smoking turkey?
Depends upon exactly how you feel about tryptophan-produced endorphins. It's a great question. And if you mix it with CBD, what would you have then? But at any rate, so what I guess will be the same is that normally this is a reasonably low-key holiday for us because we don't have that much family around anyway. But we're going to redefine low-key this year. And the one thing that will be the same is that the friends that we've gotten together with for New Year's Eve forever, and we never go out, we've worked out a way that we think the 4 of us can spend New Year's Eve together. So that'll be nice, and that'll be the same. We've now spent more time on the setup of this episode than we normally do for 2 episodes. So why don't we, without further ado, dive in. First, just as we get started, as I said last week when I described this episode, it's not our intention to talk about D's and R's or how anybody feels about Trump, Biden, Mitch McConnell, AOC, anybody else. It is our intention to focus on the liver in general, fatty liver in particular. And one of the comments Andrew made right before the podcast, which is, I think, a great place to kick off, is that you can get a tremendous amount done that nobody sees, unless you're in the middle of getting it done yourself. So what I'd love for Donna and Andrew to do is start by taking us through the last 3-4 years and what's gotten done for the liver that's good over that time.
I'll take a start. So Andrew's only 2 years with us, but having been in Washington, D.C. and in federal affairs for a quarter century, really, since my transplant, doing federal affairs for the United Network Organ Sharing, doing organ transplant policy first. It has actually been an amazing 4 years, far exceeding my expectations in terms of what we could do in healthcare. You saw investment in NIH, increase. Many of us, including Research America members, of which we've been proud members, feared would be on the chopping block. We saw some things in transplantation that, frankly, I've been working on since I was Andrew's age, finally come to fruition. I think that might be part of Andrew's effect. It just makes things move. And so he's cleared the docket of a lot of things that, when I came back onto the transplant roundtable, a sort of working group of government affairs officials that I had been on 20 years ago, they're still working on things that I had left 20 years ago with no more progress. And I'm really happy to say that several of those things have moved. Part of it was an executive order that was ostensibly about kidney health, but it did contain many pro-liver, pro-transplant, even pro-prevention and pro-innovation provisions. And so that was really exciting to see. We've now seen some movement on living donor protections, and then very, very recently, a final rule from CMS on organ procurement or organization accountability. That was a very hard battle and required the collaboration of the liver and kidney patient and professional communities in a way that I think will make us stronger moving forward. But we had incredible support on an array of issues from Senate Republicans, from people at HHS on staff, as well as many folks in the Congressional Black Caucus and Dems and those who you would expect to support health promoting, community supporting provisions. And so if the Affordable Care Act is left in place, we will actually have seen, I would say, a net progress for health, particularly liver health and transplantation health over the years of this administration, which I'll have to admit comes as a very pleasant surprise to me. But it's the work of a lot of advocates and a lot of community members.
So, Andrew, what would you like to add to that?
I think Donna really put it so eloquently, but really what we have strived to do and been so vital to so many of our efforts, think of the liver holistically and think of these initiatives holistically. And also think of collaboration first, right? It is never just us, on any issue. So we are looking to our peers, maybe it is as an example, and Donna is mentioning the executive order that happened last year, working with our peers that are in the kidney space to advance these transplant issues. Or on, any other set of issues, we're thinking of diabetes, or we're thinking of the obesity population, or whatever that might be. We're thinking collaboratively to advance these initiatives. And some other kind of specific highlights that many times go behind the scenes would be in the U.S., we have now adjusted the ICD-10 coding to now code for early and advanced hepatic fibrosis, which is obviously critical when we're, especially on today's meeting, when we're talking about NASH. It's critical that we'll now be able to code correctly. And this actually just recently took effect, and it will be in effect for fiscal year 2021. So then also in other situations, more kind of behind the scenes changes, for example, adjusting some of the CDC's educational resources to make sure that non-alcoholic fatty liver disease is included and mentioned as a risk factor and comorbidity of diabetes. So, just kind of small little things like that are happening many times that don't receive the front page kind of news, but are still critical for patients impacted by NASH. We had a liver bill introduced. It was bipartisan in the House of Representatives and supported, and it was also introduced in the Senate last year. And then we also finally, just recently, a couple months ago, this is thanks to all of our efforts consistently over, and before I started, but consistently over the years, we had a NASH bill introduced called the Nash Care Act of 2020 that is focused on developing a national strategy in the United States to go after NASH. And all this, obviously our work is still cut out on many of these initiatives, but it shows progress, and it shows, some of them are happening behind the scenes and other are kind of front and center, whether we're talking about the transplant measures or certain pieces of legislation that have been introduced. So it's been exciting in 2020. And before.
Those are great answers and great context. And Andrew, thanks for giving some really couple small specific things at the end. That helps paint the picture tremendously. The obvious question, at least in the context of 2020, is the degree to which anything having to do with the pandemic has had an impact, made things happen faster, slower, differently than they might have otherwise.
I would have to say, and this is the truth is that, we've had to find silver linings, right? Of course, no one would ever wish this pandemic or anything like that, but it is also the silver lining has been a movement, a bipartisan movement to get things done from a health policy standpoint. Now, obviously, here in the United States, we're still waiting on that last COVID response package that is critical and vital. But at the same time, earlier this year, we have seen consistent presses, bipartisan presses to get things done. And to be honest, that package would have taken years on years on years to get done in any normal time. But because of the urgency that was happening now, we saw that move quickly. And that has led to other opportunities. For example, bringing attention to prior authorization and step therapy, another critical issue, especially when we're talking about liver cancer and other aspects like that. It has opened the door. There's been a bill called the Safe Step Act that has kind of been consistently reintroduced in multiple congressional sessions And it kind of hits it's got wide support, bipartisan support, but it never really gets across the finish line. But we've seen kind of movement on it because of COVID, right? You see, okay, maybe we need to take a better look at this. There are a lot of people who can't get the care they need. In normal times, it's a system that's strained, but now you're talking about a strained system that is now breaking even more so than normal. And, this is open opportunities to kind of move those initiatives. And we've been able to get more attention on the liver, and research has been coming out too, connecting the liver and COVID. So it's about finding those kind of through lines and moving things as well.
Stephen, do you have a question for Andrew or for Donna?
First of all, I'm impressed with what Donna and Andrew are doing. As you alluded to at the beginning, it's not something that's in the mainstream that gets talked about in hepatology circles every day. We don't talk about it in the NASH field. That tends to just continually move forward outside of the clinical practice that we do every day and the research that we do every day. So that's impressive. Thank you for that. And keep it up. We need people like you and Donna and the Global Liver Institute and the Fatty Liver Foundation to drive that message forward. In fact, I was asked, I'm trying to remember, it was an advisory board I was on just last week. And the pharma company is about to launch a very robust phase 3 study. And forward thinking, as this pharma company is, with drugs already FDA approved for other indications, they have their commercial team looking to say, what do we need to do to preemptively lay the groundwork for this drug, assuming it gets FDA approved? And the conversation invariably comes back to patients and disease state awareness and the need to connect with organizations like the Global Liver Institute. No longer do we need to be siloed and stovepiped. And I think that gets me to a bigger point, I think, that you were alluding to, that prior to COVID, there was a sense of being stovepiped, of being very tunnel visioned and focused on what's in your lane, what's right in front of you, and not really taking the blinders off to look to the left and right to see where people may be doing the same thing, but they're hitting roadblocks that together you guys have enough force and power to overcome collectively. But independently, everybody was falling a little short. And so I think that has been an eye-opener in 2020. And I'll tell you another thing. I was just on a conference call this morning, a COVID-19 conference call with the University of Texas Health Science Center, where I'm on a board called Biomed SA. And we were just talking collectively about all the clinical trials being done with COVID-19, the Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, Act 4, all these other studies. And this was an infectious disease doctor giving the talk. And it was amazing to me how little prior to COVID, doctors outside of hepatology paid any attention to the liver. It's not just patients that look at it as a black box. It's doctors that look at it as a black box. It's administrators that look at it. It's policymakers that look at it as a black box, right? It's just hidden in the abdomen. It doesn't really derive a lot of attention unless it's sick, and everybody has the stigma of alcohol linked to a sick liver. And lo and behold, COVID comes up. And what do we see out of the UK Biobank? Fatty liver patients do worse. And that's validated in multiple studies around the world. And point of discussion today with the infectious disease doctor, again, is that phenomenon. And it's interesting now that liver disease is kind of brought from out of the shadows back front and center again because of an infectious disease pandemic that is unmasking the liver disease pandemic of NAFLD. And there you are, Andrew and Donna, right there, ready to pounce on that and carry us forward to the next phase of where we can go as a society. So thank you.
Well, thank you for saying that. You couldn't have said it better, and it's why it is so exciting as we go into 2021. I was on a panel recently at AASLD, and it was interesting because we had all these different groups represented, right? And it's something that even, when you were mentioning hepatologists, and you're talking about how, outside of hepatology, no one's talking about the liver. It was also interesting that even in some cases, there's a lack of collaboration between disease states that are liver advocacy organizations. And finally, we're starting to see a lot more, which is what we're so excited about, is, hey, the viral hepatitis groups or, whatever that might be are now working with us and we can all talk about, okay, when we talk about that transplant issue or we talk about liver cancer, we could say how, okay, NASH can lead to liver cancer. Viral hepatitis can lead to liver cancer. We can start having a more holistic and collaborative conversation and work on initiatives that really elevate liver health policy overall, which is the key. And that's why I think we're especially excited as we go into next year. One other kind of side note I want to mention that was exciting for us this year, which was not a specific change. We brought together the different divisions within CDC to talk about their initiatives that they're working on for liver disease and liver cancer. And again, it's another one of those examples where they say they're talking to each other, but they aren't really. Again, if we can get everyone talking about the liver, hopefully we can get more collaboration leading to a lot larger initiatives moving. And we look forward to kind of working with the CDC to do that.
And let me let everyone know we're having some technical difficulties getting Donna back in this conversation right now. Paint us a picture. Everyone thinks they're talking to each other, but they're not really. Can you pick one place people have been missing that now they're starting to connect better?
Well, it's tough because, everyone has their initiatives that they want to see accomplished. We're still dealing with the harshness that, people feel that if they advocate for, I'm just throwing this out there and this isn't necessarily the case, but if they advocate for NASH policy, they're going to be hurting their chances of getting dollars for hepatitis policy. You still have this kind of, I want to help you, but there's a finite amount of money available. So that's still the issue. But I think, again, I'm trying to think of where we're still not seeing connections. We've been so lucky with our NASH Council, for example, where we've been really able to bring a lot of people to the table. And I think one thing is we would like to see more collaboration with cardiology and so we could talk about the full metabolic syndrome more and make sure we're highlighting that point. But we're definitely bringing together, the diabetes side, the obesity angle, trying to bring as many voices to this council as possible.
I have one more question for you and then on to Louise. You folks have been talking about the executive order on kidney, right, which is mostly about costs related to dialysis. And through that, at the time that the order came out, it struck me that we might be looking at something very similar here, except that we're further behind and that we have no real understanding of where the money's getting spent. Has that initiative created an environment in which folks are looking more aggressively at that set of issues around, so where is the money being spent in liver and fatty liver, and therefore where are the big dollars, where are the big places we need to get control of?
Yes, I would say yes. And that's the thing is that, obviously, and you touched on at the beginning of the call, President Trump has had his, he has his set of issues, or things that people like and don't like, but his willingness to really take action quickly on things. Sometimes that has led to problems. Other times that has led to the movement Donna mentioned on a transplant issue that we've been fighting for a long time. And it's then led to a greater conversation about what is this, the problems in this system? How can we fix it? And that's really it's shown a spotlight on that. And that goes into the dollar point that you're mentioning, but also just in general, one of the key pieces for us has been the OPO and the organ procurement system and how we can reform that. There's a lot of OPOs that do a great job, but we want to make sure that not only is their work being shown and if they're just doing good work, they can show it, but also that we can verify and just see how the job they're doing. And that's something that, again, thanks to this order, the conversations happened. That was a key provision within the order, and then it will open the door for future efforts in 2021 and beyond. Of course, we're going to have to make sure that the shadow by the previous administration doesn't cause doubt over this executive order, because it is a good thing. But we just got to, make sure that the Biden administration sees it as a positive.
So, Louise, how does any of this align or clash with activity you see going on in the UK right now?
I think what Andrew and Donna were saying very much about the lack of collaboration in some areas between agencies and advocacies is very, very similar here. When I've looked at the heart patient sites, or you look at the cholesterol patient sites, or you look at the obesity sites and the diabetes sites, they very, very rarely mention fatty liver disease or NAFLD or NASH, yet some of the biggest population of growing cancer and liver cancer and high mortality is in those 4 areas. And are we just preventing our own populations from acknowledging that liver disease, or if we mention liver disease, we assume that it's alcohol, and therefore it's stigmatizing. So therefore we better not mention it. I'd rather be told something personally or suggest something that could be seen as stigmatizing if somebody finds liver cancer early because, it stimulated a thought. And it was interesting, I attended a Heart UK study day on cholesterol the other week. The first 2 sessions both commented on fatty liver disease, which I was really surprised at and impressed with. But more importantly, it was about the new drug developments. The drugs that they chose, they're blocking all of the pathways in the liver. And yet, if you go to the cholesterol sites, they only talk about familial hypercholesteremia. They don't mention fatty liver disease. They do mention that cholesterol is made in the liver, but that's the only sort of recognition that you will get about it. Not that actually looking for it and being it could be a sign of liver problems. And so there is very, very similar, and I think in a lot of areas. I think COVID has allowed certainly areas of healthcare to make decisions very, very quickly. But I don't know whether or not that quick decision making will continue because it wasn't there before. And people were empowered to make a decision quickly. Now, that happened in the 80s and 90s, and it came out of healthcare. People got stripped of authority. You couldn't make a decision about staffing or cost because of the implication. And of course, we have now seen the biggest cost to healthcare throughout the world that is going to cream funding in all areas for generations to come. It was ironic. There was an article published on the 29th of September last year, but one of the health organizations that report to all of the governments, report to the WHO and report to the World Economic Forum, saying that the globe was unprepared for a pandemic and it would be catastrophic because we hadn't learned the lessons. We hadn't looked at collaborating through healthcare. And what happens 3 months later? We have actually seen this article borne out because they predicted. So these governments were told that their healthcare systems weren't robust enough. And I think I would like certainly to hope that diabetes, so endocrinology, cardiology, obesity management, and liver disease now learn the lessons that we all have, the high-profile populations. We had SARS, we had MERS, and we had H1N1 that picked out high-risk populations, and we did not do anything about it. And the biggest part of the world at risk now are the third world, because fatty liver disease and non-communicable diseases are exponentially rising, and the mortality in those regions is growing. And if we don't learn the lessons, they're the most vulnerable people with the least capable healthcare systems, which is a shame. So I hope we learn the lessons, because combining all of those areas under one strategy for fatty liver is highly cost effective. It saves us quadruple spend by actually, we all target weight loss. Why? Because we can reverse diabetes in some people, but it's pancreatic and liver fat loss that helps that. It's not if you lose it off your hips. So it's about the understanding. It comes back to what I say regularly. It's education. If I know at an earlier age to look after my liver, then I will do it. I think Jeff Lazarus and Quentin Anstey a couple of years ago did a report that showed if you're obese as children, you have a 64 times risk by the time you get to your 40s of having severe liver complications. So these are our children. These are our grandchildren. And we're not learning the lessons. But to come back to politicizing, we know that a lot of lobbying goes on from food, alcohol, because that's where tax is raised. I sat on the liver strategy for the UK. It got canned because of the lobbying by drug and alcohol and food industries. And I think if we learn at an earlier age, we don't necessarily affect McDonald's bottom line. We don't affect alcohol bottom line. We just drink it in a slightly more sensible way or eat it in a slightly more sensible way. And I think so it will be interesting to see whether or not we will learn the lessons both financially and health. But all of these agencies now have to say that we've got to stop stigmatizing the liver disease. It takes a caning, but we can't live without it.
So the question I would like to wrap up today with, and we'll come back to this next week and talk about what do we see for 2021 and going ahead, is how do we think the environment for this discussion has changed as a result of COVID? Publicly, in media publicly, versus politically, versus within the different informed communities and advocacy, the patient advocates, the science community. How is COVID changing and the political dialogue around COVID changing the shape of the conversation that we're all having right now about liver and about health and what it makes sense to spend money on from the perspectives of where each of us sit? Andrew, why don't you go ahead?
Well, I'll just kind of quickly say, while, we're excited about the future, I am definitely feeling a lot of the same concerns that Louise mentioned. And right now there is the movement, right? The COVID movement that is seeing that collaboration and all of that. But at the same time, while I'm excited about the future possibilities, there is always that looming potential step back. You're starting to see members of Congress kind of fall back on their partisan lines, which is why we're not seeing the movement on this next COVID package. Or, we have the looming threat of the Affordable Care Act. And, if that, that is heading to the Supreme Court here in the United States. So are we going to be stuck kind of relitigating that early 2021 when we can instead look ahead and look for future, and kind of continue this whole collaboration that we're talking about? So, I'm definitely, concerned, but also excited. I do think the advocacy is coming together more thanks to COVID. It's opened the door. There was that policy movement coming together more. And then also from the agency side of things, you were seeing more collaboration because it was such a huge problem globally. It was collaborate or die, right? And also, I hate to say it, but, or say it specifically, but I do think the next administration will help the U.S. and its interactions globally. It will be less about U.S. first and hopefully more about collaborating with the rest of the world as well.
Okay. So, Donna, let me tell you what happened while you were gone.
I'm sure it was profound and wonderful. I trust Andrew for the professional and frankly, the policy rock star that he is. And now you all know why I can put my efforts into scaling and growing the Global Liver Institute, because I have Andrew running the policy team.
The question that we were on that Andrew was answering, I'd love for you to come to next, is how we think the environment for the discussion as a result of COVID and everything else, how it's changing now and what that's likely to mean going forward. And then next week we'll come back and talk about some specific issues around specific areas where that's the case and what that might mean for different stakeholders. But for now, just generally, where do we see moving?
Well, I have had the advantage of watching this for several months as a member of the Biden Health Policy Committee. And, it was a brilliant, committed, very engaged, robust, thoughtful team, not monolithic by any means, which I think means good things for the country because it means that ideas have been pressure tested and there were pushback in various areas. What I see forming in terms of, Biden's selections, personnel is policy. And so with former Attorney General, I guess he's still current Attorney General at this point, Becerra, who I remember and worked with very well when he was a member of Congress, smart Harvard man, and, attorney. So those are all good things, of course. But I think that it's an untraditional choice to put in charge of HHS. But I think what it means is that the legal infrastructure for providing healthcare for all Americans is something that's going to be paid attention to and fought for. I think also you'll see, an independence and a revitalization and structure of CDC, of FDA, of the regulatory process, of regulatory science, restoration of NIH, or Andrew has spoken about, our hopes for the elevation of liver within NIH. I think the most important change and the thing that I think will help liver patients the most is all of the policies have gone through and are going to benefit from a diversity, equity, and inclusion lens. You see that not only in healthcare, but you see that playing out in Treasury and economic policy, and so health as well. I think that COVID has certainly unearthed how communities of color are affected when, the rest of America has a cold, Black America gets the flu, is the saying that, has been said in the past. And we certainly saw that with COVID. And so liver health has always been one of those issues as well, where we've seen communities of color having layers of inequities pile up and result in lack of access to healthcare, lack of access to screening, thus lack of access to treatment, resulting in liver cancers caught too late, and so mortality unnecessarily high. You see people who are not even placed on the waiting list for transplant and dying because of that. I think those are the types of issues that we will be able to have really robust, not only conversations, but partners in solutions in this next administration. administration. And that is very, very exciting to me.
Stephen, from where you sit, how do you see the dialogue and the environment changing, for better and for worse?
Well, I think 2020 has allowed for a lot of reflection and introspection. And I think maybe the time that people were booking flights and getting through security lines at the airport, they were able to spend on Zoom calls like this one and reflect on where the fields are going. Andrew made a point earlier that I've seen begin to unfold in 2020, and I hope it continues into 2021 and beyond. And that is this broadening the aperture beyond just fatty liver to more of a metabolic condition as a whole. And how do we design clinical trials to answer the broader question, and not just a liver-centric question, and not just a heart question, not just a diabetes question, and not just an obesity question. But since they're all interconnected and interlinked, why can't we answer multiple questions with one study? And it began to become clear that part of the problem is the way we design these clinical trials. For instance, if I'm designing a NASH phase 3 trial, I'm going after a liver-related endpoint. I want to know who's going to decompensate, who's going to develop cirrhosis, who's going to need a liver transplant, who's going to develop bleeding varices, etc. But I'm not addressing who's dying of a heart attack or who's developing kidney cancer or pancreatic cancer or whatever, a stroke. And it turns out that I'm intentionally excluding those people from my protocol because I'm taking people that have known histories of heart disease and excluding them. I'm excluding people with any renal impairment. It turns out if you design a CVOT, a cardiovascular outcome trial, you enrich for people with heart disease and you enrich for people that have renal failure. Those are the two biggest components of a CV outcome trial because that's the highest likelihood of having a second event. So meeting with the agency and sitting down and saying, how can we answer multiple questions simultaneously? Or maybe we have two parallel phase 3s going simultaneously, where one of them is addressing a renal question, one is addressing a CV outcome question, or we somehow put them both together and we say, we're willing to admit that if a patient dies of a heart attack, that's a bad outcome, regardless if their liver didn't fail, right? So why can't we include CV outcomes in our cardiac trials, understanding that maybe there won't be that many events, but if there's some events, that's still important. Anyway, I'll summarize by saying that discussion really didn't happen prior to COVID. And I've seen it dramatically take off in 2020. And it's now a focal point of many different conversations I'm on every week.
Stephen, I'm so grateful for that. When I talk to NASH patients and we parse those exact points, when we're dead, we're dead. We can care a little less what we die from, whether it is liver-related mortality or cardiovascular-related mortality or all cause, some cause, we still died. So we are very grateful for the folks who would like to figure that out. I also think that, my time spent in the real world evidence and, data field was well spent as we think about what can observational studies show us, at least directionally, or what can, things like, PCORNet, which are networks of networks, allowing us in real time to see in ways that, be confounding how trials that are meant for drug approvals are normally done in terms of, having strict exclusionary criteria. So I think we should be really creative in the types of research that we do, the types of data sources that we include, certainly the types of endpoints that we look at. And I'm so glad that these type of conversations are happening as frequently on the physician side as they are on the patient side. Recently I said to staff who had come back to me saying, well, the evidence and literature show X. I said, well, the evidence in the literature became the evidence in the literature because a certain group of people asked particular questions and then published them. And so if we want different evidence, if we want different literature, then different people are going to have to start asking the questions, and different type of research is going to have to be done. And so it's exciting to me to see that COVID or whatever circumstances have opened up people's minds to new possibilities.
Louise, one thought from you, and then I have a close, and then we will wrap up and get ready for next week.
Yeah, I'm just going to pick up on, again, what Stephen and Donna were saying there, because we touched on it last week with Jean, in the fact that cardiology studies will have cardiology outcomes. The trouble is that they don't rule out fatty liver disease other than normal and abnormal liver function. So, and you don't know that cardiac event that happened in a cardiac study wasn't driven by fatty liver disease because it wasn't assessed for. So I think Stephen and Donna and Jean last week are quite correct. We do need to open our minds as to what could be the cause, because it's a high-density cardiac population or a high-density liver population. We're going to get the outcomes that we more or less design to answer the question that we wanted to design in the first place. So, and I think COVID has opened that up. And I think we're seeing that here in the UK with an obesity strategy, with far more people now being into the mindset that developing poor health could cause our early mortality. And I think that's a good question to raise and a good question to see answered. But how we're going to do that long term, I don't know. And 2021 might show us that.
So thanks, Louise. That's a really helpful comment. I think I'm hearing that behind the scenes, what COVID has fostered, that was building already anyway, is the opportunity for some rather exceptional convergence between people with different viewpoints, but somewhat related goals, broadening their vision to encompass the goals that different groups shared. When we talk about different medical specialties coming together, when we talk about being able to find funding and urgency to take action that wasn't there previously, all this to me is about convergence. And in general, I think convergence is a good thing. The question for 2021 is going to be whether the circumstances that led to that convergence will hold or not.
They will, and I'll tell you why. It was not inevitable that liver issues would be put to the forefront during COVID. They were put there because of AASLD's fantastic response to COVID. Very robust, very thorough. It was put there because of the COVID registries that were stood up specific to answer liver questions. And they were put there because of folks like Andrew, which liver health never had a policy driver before. Even before GLI, could get the ink signed on our 501c3, we were asked to take on policy issues because there was no one else in the liver community, from the patient side at least, to do that. The Advocacy Academy was built larger this year. Both NASH organizations came from our Advanced Advocacy Academy, and we're not going away. And I think that the liver community as a whole, in all of its constituent parts, patients, advocates, advocacy organizations, researchers, medical societies, have gotten a taste of what it's like when we use our voice and put our data and our issues forward and don't take no for an answer. And so we've never seen that before. And we've never seen organizations still so prepared to keep doing that and to do that at an even higher level in 2021. So it is going to happen and be maintained in 2021 because, frankly, that is what I am built to do.
Okay, now let me give you the other side of the dynamic, right? A lot of this runs on money, right? Historically, what we know, and now I will do D's and R's for a minute, is that Republicans have been supportive of deficits under Republican presidents and very, very tight with money they're willing to spend under Democratic presidents. If we assume that regardless of what happens in Georgia, the Democrats are not going to have a majority that will allow them to do what they wish at their will, then in fact, the willingness to put government resource behind these solutions may be real or may not be quite as real, depending upon how individual players outside of healthcare, but within political space, decide that they're best positioned. I worry about that. Okay.
Well, I think that's why we have focused, the NASH Act has bipartisan support. Everything we've done has had bipartisan support from some of the even most conservative members. And it's not always about money. I think perhaps that's why I've succeeded this long in Washington, D.C., with RSD's eyes, whatever letter you want to put in front of your name, because I think as I bring forward solutions, it's not always about money, or at least about more money, but using resources more effectively and putting attention on the right priorities to have the most impact. And so I think if we are smart and we are collaborative, the coalitions I've built in kidney health, for example, have lasted, almost 20 years. It started focusing just on one issue, and they've survived. And so I think we can do the same in liver health, and everybody who has a liver should care about liver health. And so that's everybody. And so I don't think we're going to take a step back. I think it's not going to be easy. But I think we are more united, and the people united shall never be defeated.
So that's a great note for ending this week. And when we come back to this next week, what I'd like to come back on are what are the specific priorities and issues that we need to put front and center for each of the different stakeholder groups so that we can do exactly what you just said, capitalize on what binds us and what benefits all of us in ways that are less sensitive to whatever political winds or pressures there might be that will lead people to take steps that in the extreme might not be what we would hope they would do, right? How do we build, as you describe it, a robust, multidimensional, multi-stakeholder pathway forward? What are the issues? What are the planks? What are the things we've got to get to make that work? And I think we can share that with this audience. Then people will understand what we each need to do going forward to support that part of a very broad set of public issues. And it would be a really helpful thing.
I look forward to launching our U.S. NASH Action Plan on this podcast.
Okay. Next week, everybody, that's what we've got to look forward to. In the meantime, let's just close it out. Same question as always. What's the one thing you heard in the last hour that you found most surprising or intriguing? Brave one, go first.
I'll be the brave one. I suppose I'm excited when Stephen says that they're having conversations about the different outcomes and combining those outcomes and looking beyond just a liver outcome in a liver study. And that wasn't happening, I don't think, before COVID. It wasn't happening in lots of diseases. So it's exciting to listen to Stephen say that is now discussions that clinical trials are having about broadening their outcomes.
I was just going to say, I'm excited, Andrew, whenever you speak, because it means that this, next generation of liver health policy advocates has a leader, and I can scale myself and focus on solving other problems. So I feel like I've done my job as a, generational mentor and transferring and making sure that, the experiences and knowledge that I've had in 25 years of policy are being passed on, and then I'm being surpassed as you do things even better. So I'm always excited to listen to you and your vision for liver health for the future.
So Andrew, that means you have to go next, right? Live up to that one.
Yeah. Well, that's a tough one to follow, but thank you so much, Donna. But, I was really just going to say that, what really excites me and what is great to hear is that, as the world has continued to grapple with this crisis, and it really is the dual crisis, that we haven't talked about much, but, the racial and socioeconomic, injustice that's happening in the U.S. as well and globally. But those dual crises, we're seeing, a positive come out of it. And I think that's what we talked about today, whether we're talking about what's going on in the UK or here in the US or, with clinical trials and more between different specialties. We're seeing collaboration. I think it's exciting about the future. Obviously, we're going to talk about next week about how we need to keep that going. And there's opportunities to do that. But I think, no matter who's in charge of the United States, I think we're going to see, positive, change here. And I think it's great to see.
Well, I can't beat that love fest happening between Donna and Andrew. But what I can speak to more broadly, despite the political polarity that has happened in 2020, democracy is alive and well, and podcasts such as this allow for this sort of information to be disseminated broadly. And that, I think, is a huge win for all of us.
Thank you, Stephen. That's great. That's a great thing.
You can join Team DLI and be loved and appreciated too, and live up to your full potential.
My mother always tells me she hopes I one day live up to my fullest potential.
Yeah. Well, you got plenty of time, dude. Yeah, so basically,
That's right. You're young.
I'm going to go back to where I was a couple of minutes ago, which is the level of convergence that two have been talking about is really exciting because momentum is one part speed, but a much bigger part exactly how efficiently and how broadly there is energy behind the direction in which things are going, because it becomes harder to stop boulders moving slowly than it does pebbles flying, if you want to take a little dig in your hand. So the idea that you have the breadth of momentum and convergence that we're talking about is probably the best predictor that good things will happen. So I didn't necessarily expect to emerge from this conversation more optimistic than I was going in. That happens a lot of weeks around here. But I think that kind of convergence is really powerful. And next week we will come back and we will talk about exactly what are the different directions that convergence and that momentum will allow us to go, and what can different kinds of stakeholders who listen to this podcast, what role can we all play in helping this go forward in 2021. With that, I want to thank you guys for a much more interesting episode than we expected. Donna, thanks for being back, and thanks for persevering beyond your technical challenges. And thank you for bringing us Andrew, who's been a real gift. And Louise, thanks for believing that being from the UK, you could make a contribution to an American conversation, because, as I think Andrew points out, it's really a more global conversation than that. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Stephen. And then thanks to the team that puts this together, Mike, Eric, Politea, people at Buzzsprout, and you all, our listeners. Tell your friends to listen to this episode and stay tuned for next week, because we're going to start talking about how we all can get involved in making this better for the liver community in the year ahead. And I think that'll be a fantastic thing. So with that, everybody stay extra safe this week, because extra safe is going to be important as this pandemic keeps raging. Surf on. Take care of yourselves. We'll see you on the podcast next week. Okay. Bye-bye now.
Drug developers, investors, researchers, and corporate executives wrestle weekly to understand what is happening in commercial development of NASH medications. Join hepatology researcher and key opinion leader Stephen Harrison, patient advocate Donna Cryer, liver wellness advocate Louise Campbell, and forecasting and pricing guru Roger Green as they discuss the issues affecting the evolving NASH market from their own unique perspectives on the Surfing the NASH Tsunami podcast.